Hey everyone. Let's see. There we go. Okay, there we go. Hey everyone. Happy Thursday. I hope you guys are having an amazing week. I am so excited today because I get to introduce you to the world's most interesting investor. Now, we have some history. I'm going to share a little bit of our history, and then I'm going to let Robin Scovill introduce himself from the real estate standpoint, tell you a little bit more about him. But let me tell you some background because it's just entertaining and amazing. So Robin and I have known each other since 2007. So 13 years. Can you believe it? 13 years.
I can't believe it. It's crazy.
It's amazing. So when I met Robin, he was a filmmaker in Los Angeles, and he decided that he wanted to learn to add some passive income to his life because the film industry and doing documentaries and everything that was his world, it wasn't super steady. It was projects. And so he wanted to add that element into his life for passive income. And so he had basically come in and was doing a field training with me, which is like a kind of the equivalent of like a one-on-one training. And we did that in Detroit. That's where I lived at the time. And he was interested in investing there. And anyway, so I mean, I can literally remember sitting in Panera Bread.
Panera Bread.
In Grosse Pointe.
Yeah.
Sitting at the table, going through. Anyway, so Robin and I go way, way, way back. And it's funny because even back in 2007, everybody that I always worked with, when I went, I always said, feel free to stay in touch with me. But very few people have or do, but Robin did. So as he started like growing and growing and growing, and I'll let him tell you what that actually looks like. But as an investor, he would every once in a while reach out and be like, hey, this is what I've done, which of course I'm so excited about, like so proud. I'm like, oh my God, look at my little boy. He's growing up to be an investor. And, so he would call me every once in a while and just share with me what he's done, or it said, hey, I'm working on this. Do you know anything about this? And eventually those questions, I was like, you just surpassed me at this point. So no, but it was really fun to be a part of his journey. And when it came time, when I worked for a training company the last 5 years, and I was traveling and doing one-on-one trainings and speaking, at one point we needed other people to be able to do that. And the first person that came to my mind was Robin, because he's just had so successful as an investor and as an educator, as an orator. Like he's just talented at the nth degree. So anyway, so he came on. So we've now had a chance to work together for the last several years doing training. So anyway, I know that's a lot of background, but I just want to share this with you guys and share Robin with you and let him tell you just some of the stuff he's doing his journey. Robin, I would love for you to share this story because it came up in our mastermind this week at some point, if you can, about what you did when you were brand new. And someone was like, well, investing, and what you told them you had done. So anyway, so many fun things to talk about. So I'm going to hand it over to Robin, put you on the big screen. And so Robin, just tell us about you.
Hey everybody, how fun. I don't want to brush your little foray there into our history under the rug, because it's actually really profound for me. Stacy, it's the equivalent of the love of my life. You know what I mean?
Aww.
Like you're the mentor of my life. And I knew nothing about real estate when I met you, but I could tell that you did know a lot about real estate, and I wanted to be there. I wanted to be on the other side of that chasm that when you desire to be great at something, but you're not, and then you have a mentor that is, that you start to emulate and to see really what's possible. So, I just want everybody to know that Stacy changed my life, and really briefly, my journey was that, I had a point around 2005 or 2006 where I realized that I was financially illiterate. And I had big dreams, and I was up to big things, and I sort of was pursuing things that I had no right to pursue, but I always was bumping my head against, my relationship to finances and wealth. And let me give you an example, because I grew up in a household where I would say, we had a poverty mentality. Not only did we kind of live in poverty, but you couldn't talk about money. It wasn't polite to even be interested in, if somebody did something, well, how much did you make doing that? It just wasn't cool. And so I sort of grew up with that mindset. And later in life started to realize, it started showing up as I was looking for funding for films, thinking, you know, the film business, I don't need to deal with that. I'm the creative person. When that creativity strikes, then the film business part will take care of itself. And and that wasn't happening for me. And there's a good reason for it, because you can't push the business aside. You know, if even if you are an artist, and you desire to have some sort of commercial interaction doing that, or an investor, obviously putting people's money to work or your own money to work, you have to be able to, you know, have that relationship that works. And that kept getting in my way. So I set out to change that poverty mentality. And for me, that was voraciously reading. And that led me to some seminar work. And then I met Stacy on the road and bought a field training with her. And I just couldn't get enough. In fact, I did 3 field trainings in a row. I don't know if you remember that, Stacy, but 2 of your other colleagues, I just was like, okay, I'm going to train with her, and then I'm going to just get 2 other ones under my belt. I think you were the last one, actually. And at that,
the best for last.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I think I did my first deal about 3 or 4 weeks after training with Stacy. I bought a single family house in Detroit. We rehabbed it. I bought it for $7,000. We rehabbed it for about 8,000 or 9,000. It was a house that had a fire, and everybody told us stay away from fire. Well, it turned out that my crew, what I mainly paid for was a crew to come in and scrub the walls, like soapy water, brushes, and scrub the walls. And they took it, almost everything completely away. And then we were able to put a layer of kills. And that was the problem with the house. And so for about $15,000, it took me 3 weeks to rehab that house. And I started getting $1,000 a month in rent for that. And that set me on my way.
Amazing.
Incredible.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that we have such amazing history. And I get so excited to see just where you are now and what that journey was, just so full. Okay. So.
Well, I'll just say, let me say this real quick too. You know, Stacy, you did make yourself available to me. Should I be talking to you or to folks? Hi, folks.
It's either way.
Okay. You know, you did make yourself available to me, and I didn't want to overutilize that, because you really were. You and these other trainers were like rock stars to me, you know. And but I did sort of have some access, and I just remember, like, you know, every time I would have a problem, I would call you, and you'd be like, "All right, tell me about the problem." So I would start going through the problem, and I could hear your fingers on the keyboard, and I thought, "Wow, she's taking notes about our conversation," you know. And I can hear her fingers clicking away. And then at some point she would say, "So let me just tell you what I'm hearing, right? This is what you're doing. You're working with 2 realtors." And I go, "Yeah." And you go, and what's the training? How many realtors should you be working with in a market? And I would go, 6. And she'd like more typing. And I'm like, wow, she's really taking notes. And then you'd be like, "Okay, I got to go." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And you're like, "Well, what do you mean? What do I mean? Didn't I just help you?" And I was like, "What are you saying?" And you go, "You're not following the systems, Robin." What I don't, you know, so, okay, you need more, follow the systems. Or more realtors on your team. And I started to learn very quickly that the only time I got into trouble investing in real estate was when I deviated from my systems. And my systems were a combination of things that I bought and things that I learned from Stacy and things that I just put my common sense to, and kind of made my own way of approaching this, and did so rather quickly, I have to say, because I did a lot of houses my first year. I did more than that the next year. And before long, within a couple of years, I was into multi-units. And then not long after that, into low-income housing development, you know, using low-income housing tax credits and other subsidies that became available. Learned how to build an incredible team. One of the things that I realized was, you know, I used to look at, and this is that poverty mentality again. I used to look and go, "Oh, what does it take to do this thing I'd like to do?" Right? But I don't know enough about it. And then I would start looking and go, "Oh, I don't have those things." So I would stop. That was one of the things that I had to work on in my training, was to realize that if I don't have it, go find somebody who has it. Like, build a team to fill in the gaps in your strengths. And also just understanding that everybody has, you know, those weaknesses. No one does it all. right? It just doesn't work that way.
That is 100% truth.
Yeah.
100% truth. So, God, I mean, I feel like we could just talk. There's so many interesting parts. I could go for hours, and I know we can't do that. So so let's start off talking about, let's talk about when we had reconnected, when you kind of taken it to the next level. And by then it must have been 2009 or 2010.
I think 2010. Are you talking about? You talking about?
Yeah, when you had, so you had acquired. So talk a little bit about the 26 unit, because that was really your first. Because there's people that are watching. Everyone that's watching this is either in our passive income real estate group or in our How to Buy Apartments group. And so a lot of people are either they're already investing, but maybe they haven't made that leap to apartments yet, or they're just brand new. And in either way, I think it's a really interesting transition to be on the journey of, okay, you've gotten some properties now. You got a whole bunch of them, but you've gotten some properties now. You have a flow. You kind of get it, and then you step up to the next level. And that's the normal path. But tell us a little bit about the first time that you made that leap into apartments, and tell us about that deal specifically too, because that was a really interesting deal.
Yeah.
So about 3 years in.
Yeah, that was a really sweet deal. And I just have to say, everybody should define their own path, but in general, I don't recommend people starting right into large apartment buildings, because the reality of passive, cash flow properties, first of all, they're not passive for a long time. You know what I mean? I mean, you really do. Work is required and attention must be paid. Yes. And having one duplex doesn't give you a retirement, at least not in Detroit. It could maybe in Manhattan or San Francisco in the city proper. I don't know, but all the markets are different. But for me, it was a huge leap. Every progression I've made has been like, it felt impossible. Just doing my first deal, even on a $7,000 house. But houses led to duplexes, and duplexes led to fourplexes, or what we call, multifamily flats, under 5 units, non-commercial. But what was happening for me at that time, Stacy, if you recall, was I had to build management systems. I thought at first I was going to hand these off to management companies. And I learned, at least in my market, that if I wanted to hemorrhage money, hand off to a management company, because most of them don't know what they're doing, and most of them are trying to make their living off of creating problems that they can solve, right? And I don't mean that like there's anything nefarious going on. It's just the model, and they want to have everything good, and so they're always making recommendations, and it's easy to kind of get pulled in down a track if you don't know about that. So I started immediately building management systems, and that was a lot of what I recall coming and tapping into you about, was like how to do this kind of stuff. And those were just fundamental things, like how to screen tenants, and finding out what are the meaningful, markers in your particular market. Like in Detroit, I got very clear very quickly that I didn't even want to look at people's credit ratings, because most of my tenant base didn't have good credit. And good credit doesn't necessarily mean that you're a poor credit risk. But if I had stuck to that gun, I never would have gotten started in getting tenants into these houses. So that's just an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about, and how to, take steps when things are starting to go sideways, what to do to get things back on track. So at some point, I'm always been ambitious, but 4 units was the most I'd done. And one of my 6 realtors came to me and said, hey, there's an opportunity here. I got a 26 unit building that's in trouble with a bank, and it's underperforming. And do you want to take a look at it? And I was like, yes. So I called Stacy immediately, and I was like, okay, how do I do due diligence on a 26 unit building? And she was like, well, that's a good question. Let me ask that of you. Like, what did you learn about this? And so I started to really,
hold on a second. On that one, you actually called me after you owned it.
Oh, I did? It wasn't in the due diligence part.
But okay. You want a 26 unit? I was like, whoa, okay, let's talk. Yeah, no, so we were talking.
Okay. Okay. Well, look, there's been,
the fact.
At this point, there's been so many of these kinds of transactions.
I know.
It's been a while ago, and I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I'm at least 30 years older than you are, Stacy. Okay, so I just jumped in and I took what I had learned. I had done multi-unit boot camps and stuff like that with you. This was beyond our field training. And so I just was like, I'm going to trust. That was the first thing, is I said, I trust the source. I'm going to trust the systems. And there was just a point where I just went, I am just going to trust this. And a lot of this, one of the first things about the systems is trust, but then once the trust is established, then go about the business of verification. And so, I don't do anything blindly these days. Anytime I did, that's where I got into trouble. But yeah, we jumped right into it. And I built, I basically built a website that could collect all of our due diligence from photo, because I also thought, hey, there's gonna be other people who are gonna wanna know what we know about this, my team. And so I built a website with a friend who's kind of become my chief technical officer. He's one of my investors. And so we built a website where we could start putting photos and inspection reports and a ticking clock. So we had this clock constantly running on the website to tell us when our due diligence was up.
Amazing.
And it was just a real thrill, because the more I got into it, the more I started realizing, wow, we can do this. I mean, I was buying a building for about $100,000 that was 26 units, and it had 80% was filled, but it was performing at what we call a 35% occupancy. What's the term?
Economic
occupancy.
Yep.
Meaning people are there and using up your resources and holding the room hostage, but they're not paying. And so, I got a very clear picture about what we actually had to do to get this thing up and running and get it back on track. And I used that in my negotiations with the bank. And I was also well aware that this bank was highly motivated to sell this property, because it had gone non-performing and the owner took off and the bank was left holding the note and trying to manage a property. And I remember speaking to the woman who was tasked with that from the bank, and she was frazzled. And so she was very clearly sharing with me everything that was wrong. And I actually utilized that knowledge from her to negotiate the lowest purchase price I could get. I think they were asking $150. We ended up paying $100 for it, which we did with cash. I went from not having any money to building my systems and speaking confidently about them enough to where I got an investor who said, hey, I'll put up the cash if you do the work. And so we bought that first building, and look, it was one of my favorite real estate deals, because we bought it for $100,000. I remember putting, I think, 40 to 45,000 into it. We didn't even really turn the units. We just cleaned up the units. And the first thing we did was we gave everybody that wasn't paying notices, and we followed through. If people weren't paying, and about half the people started paying, they had management before that didn't demand that of them. And we did. So, and there was a very compassionate approach, but also a pretty unyielding approach. Like, you're going to get the best side of me, but you got to hold up your side of the agreement, which is pay your rent on time. I'll hold up my side, which is there's a room for you that your key goes into the lock and it turns, and that you get to go in at will, right? That's the exchange that we make as landlords. And, I was learning on the fly, but we got that building. One of the things we did was we insulated the attic, because everybody said they had to run the water for 20 minutes to get it warm coming out of the tap.
Wow.
And one of our inspectors went up and said, well, here's the reason. The water main runs in the attic, but it's not an insulated attic, and there's no insulation. So it's cold up there. So hot water is going to cool really quickly coming down galvanized pipe. So I asked my contractor, why don't we just fill that up with 2 feet of insulation? It'll make the units warmer and it'll insulate the pipe. And that cut 20 minutes down to 2 minutes for people to get hot water into their units. And because we were paying for water, that right away, that was part of what we call turning the management around.
Yes.
As a way that actually helps the tenants and really helps our bottom line.
That's awesome. We were just before you and I hopped on here, I was running, we have a 5-day challenge going on for people who are trying to get into apartments, just laying the foundation. And we were talking today about the financial things, like basics, net operating income. So for those of you who are participating in that, or you watch it later, when Robin talks about, like, one of the things that you can do to increase your net operating income or your NOI is raise the revenue of the building. The other thing you can do is you can decrease the expenses. So this is a really good example of and it has almost like up to 10 times impact, anything you do dollar for dollar on the value of the property. So if you cannot, because on a multifamily building, on an apartment building, the landlord is the one paying the water. That is nearly universal. Every once in a while, they'll have something where they end up billing the tenants, but generally that's an expense that we incur.
Yeah.
So if you can decrease that expense because they're not running water for 20 minutes and they only need to run it for 2, that goes straight to your bottom line, which increases your cash flow and increases the value of your property. That was a good, I don't even think I knew that about that. That's cool.
Yeah, that was a huge one. The other one was like getting people who weren't paying, look, there are a lot of reasons why people don't pay. So we got into it. I was having personal calls with all my tenants. That was one of the things right away. I was like, if I can make a difference this way, I think this stands the most chance. But, we were in communication with people, and by getting some of the, not just the non-paying people, but the bad element, like there was a bad element in the building that as we started to clean that up, the tenants who were thinking about leaving were like so grateful that they were like, we want to stay, and then the fact that we'd solved their water issue, we really want to stay. And the fact that I'm calling them on the phone and having a personal connection with them, we built some kind of a loyalty. I don't want to over romanticize that because it's not 100%, exchange. But for me, it was really important to identify areas that could make a difference in our management. And one of the things I started seeing was that, people, there's several stages to eviction. One is you don't pay rent on the first. Now we give a grace period. So on the first, if rent didn't come in, I was teaching my manager to call those people and say, look, you're okay. We know, you're not incurring a cost, but on day 5 you will. And we don't want that. We don't want your money for late payment. We want you empowered to pay your rent on time. And so we started identifying those areas, and my amazing partner, who became my partner at the time, was just my property manager, Evelyn Harris, out here in Detroit. Evelyn, Stacy. She really was highly coachable. She really got the compassion of this and started to do it, and she was great at it. So we watched collections start to skyrocket and as a direct result of that kind of an approach. So that's just another example of what we started to do. And that, that's, for me, I had to build my systems around what felt right to me as a person and where my conscience was. I consider myself a really good person, but if you start telling me a story about why you're not paying rent, I want to clarify something right out of the gate. It's a lot easier for me to pay attention to you if you're paying your rent on time. This is a symbiotic relationship, and your story is amazing, and I value story. But it doesn't matter what your story is in this particular case. Like, we know that we can help empower you, and we know that you want to be empowered to meet that basic fundamental need of paying rent on time. So that was just where we focused, and we turned that building around, Stacy. We were up to 95. I mean, look, we were at 100% sometimes, but you're never 100%, honestly, but 95 in that area was unheard of. We had low tenant turnover. We had high collection rates, meaning people, we didn't have to pursue collections. So low collection, I don't know what that's called, but we were also very effective at collecting because we would have these conversations with people. And when we needed to evict people, we did. And we also, the word got around very quickly that if you left and didn't pay, and had $1,200 that you owed to us, or $1,500, we're gonna pursue that. So we got really clear. It took me a couple years for my heart to get out of my own way. That wasn't common sense thinking, where I was letting people get away with it until one of my office managers, I think it might have even been you, doing a review of the books. Because guys, later, when after I got some stuff under my belt, Stacy kind of came in as a CFO for me on occasion, and then helped as a consultant to conduct due diligence on larger acquisitions. But we saw we had a lot of collectibles, and we were like, we got to do something about that. This is me being nice, and it's not responsible to my investors. So we turned that building around, and I ran that building. It probably kicked off $50,000 a year for about 7 or 8 years. And then we sold it for $1 million.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it. I love that story.
Yeah.
It's funny because one of the things that I talk about in our mastermind, or if I'm just doing a class or whatever when it comes up, is that when you're running your business, and this is especially for people who are newer and you're just and not empowered yet, they don't know to be empowered yet. A lot of the decisions that you make and the conversations you have with your team, I always tell people, like, you have to be the CEO. You got to be the CEO, and you have to have the hard conversations when the time comes. And when you have a contractor who's like, yeah, I want to get paid. Okay, well, is the work done? And because the work's not done, then I can't pay you. Oh, but I need you to kind of check this time, blah, blah, blah. And here's the deal. What I want everyone to know, and what I'm always talking about is, yeah, you might be the only one in your business, so especially if you're self-funded and you're using the bank and stuff like that. But it doesn't matter. You have to operate like a CEO, as if you are on a board. You're hired by that board to manage the funds of all of the shareholders. Now, in Robin's case, that was legitimate because of how he chose to raise funds. He legitimately did have investors that he had to answer to. But some of you will and some of you will not. And when you don't, it's easier to be like, well, I don't want to have that hard conversation, because you're not actually having to answer to anyone. And what I'm telling you is, it's a mistake to operate that way. You have to put yourself in the mindset of, I am managing this property and these funds for all these outside investors, which means I better act responsibly and do the hard thing, have the hard conversation when need be, because it's not just about me. And if you don't really have investors, you have to pretend that you do, so that you can kind of be held accountable, Robin, the way that you're talking about. Okay, but you legitimately were. But a lot of people don't feel like they are empowered to be that, because they don't really have it. But you got to act like you do.
I'm not going to correct you, but I'll say this on top of it. You don't pretend to be a CEO, even if you're using your own money.
Agreed. No, you are the CEO.
Yeah, you have you
Yes.
actually. It's tricky to think that you don't have to be, because the truth is, in order for you to perpetuate this, for this to be sustainable, you have to get the results you're looking for. You have to bring fiscal responsibility to your actions, or you will fail. And I don't know anybody, unless you're so rich, and frankly, that's a myth, right? Even rich people, they don't just throw money around. They might do that over a meal or some cigars or whatever,
right,
or cars. But when it comes to investing in business, nobody signs on the line that is dotted unless they feel really sure how they're getting their money back, to whatever degree you can be, because we do take certain risks, but the idea is to mitigate those risks. And, that's part of the poverty mentality, that money, let me just do this, put your eye on that prize right away, and simply know that you are the CEO of your business. You are the master of your destiny. And no one is going to do that as well as you are. And if you put something into someone else's hands and trust, but don't verify, and it goes sideways, that's your responsibility. Yeah. You can blame the person, but I don't blame anybody anymore. I might do it in my head, but in a moment of weakness, because we're all, none of us want confrontation. It's a human nature thing to not want to have confrontation. So somebody goes, hey, I'm sorry I did that to you, when I clunked you on the head with that little rubber mallet, and you go, oh, that's okay. I found myself, that's part of my poverty mentality, but what I'm really good at doing now is going, yeah, I will actually want to talk to you about that. First of all, getting clunked on the head with your rubber mallet does not work for me, not even for one moment. And I say this with total respect, I respect you, but do not do that to me again. One of the things I love about setting people back on the path isn't to get tough and be, in charge. It's to empower people. I actually, even saying it, I get a rush. These pheromones or whatever just course through my body when I realize I can say something to somebody in a way that's important and maybe isn't even comfortable, but what they get out of it elevates them, and it benefits both of us, and it takes our relationship to the next level. Yeah. So, for me, it's always about the agreement. Let's look back at what we agreed to do. You were going to do this for this amount of money. Where are we now? And you said you'd do it in this amount of time. So let's take a look at where we are with that, and just being in that space where you do not put money out in front of work with contractors. I've done it. Sometimes I lost my money and sometimes I didn't, but I was at the mercy of that. Now I make an agreement, and all my contractors know they get reimbursed retroactively. So if they can afford to carry a week's worth of the work, we'll inspect that work. Once we sign off on it, a check is cut, and now they're reimbursed, and they start doing the same process again. So these are the kinds of things that management, acquisition, managing rehabs, managing sales and marketing. You just have to have your eye on the high level stuff and make sure that what everybody's doing makes sense and is in service to that thing.
Yeah, and I think you said something earlier, and then I want to have you talk about some of the stuff you've been doing more recently. But earlier you had said, passive income. You didn't exactly say it this way, but this is the gist, and I've said this for years. Passive income it's not passive. It's not 100% passive. The passive income is you're not going to a job and sitting down working in a cubicle for 8 hours and trading for a paycheck. It's passive compared to that, but you still have to keep your eye on the prize. You still need to, especially when you have management. Now, you built such a big portfolio, you could put your own management into play and run a management company, but most people are not in that position. So they have third-party management. If you're turning your property over and just being like, okay, they're handling it, and you're not looking at those monthly reports and questioning every single expense, that's not like a utility or anything like that, you are not taking care of your asset because you think they are. Nobody cares about your assets more than you do. So the passive part of it is just that you're not going to a job, but you still got to manage your business. You got to watch, you have to hold people accountable. So it's not 100% passive. It's like, not like do it and forget it. I've heard someone say that yesterday. Oh, passive, do it and forget it. I'm like, oh, there's, hold on a second. Let me recover from laughing. It's not that.
Yeah.
But you can build a great retirement and a great future and a great cash flow opportunity for yourself, but you've got to keep your head in the game
and a way of life. I mean, I have my head in real estate every day, but I don't have my head in real estate all day. I mean, because I have focused a lot on cash flow properties, I have a second career. I mean, I'm a filmmaker too. I'm a writer and a director, and that that needs a certain amount of my attention per day. So, I have a very right brain, left brain kind of thing. I have boards on one side of the room and on the other, and one is real estate and one is creative and film. But no, you have to be on your game, know what it is that you're tracking, and not be afraid when you see something that you don't understand to go get the clarity you need. A lot of people just, again, it goes into that confrontation mode. Don't think of it like confrontation. Think of it like keeping your team informed, keeping yourself informed.
Exactly.
It's fun.
Exactly.
Fun.
So
it makes a lot of time. It makes a lot of time for me to walk dogs, spend time with my wife, do other things, and also be on my game when I do get onto it. Yeah.
I love it. So Robin, tell us, let's spend the next, let's say 10 or so minutes, and let's just talk about because we talked about the beginnings, and your beginning was just amazing, but you've really gone on to do some pretty amazing and just cool projects. Can you just tell us about some of the cool stuff that you've done and what you're working on now? And
I'll just talk about like the main three things. One of the things that happened, and there's a lot of these things, I bit off more than I could chew. I had bought a 43 unit building in Midtown Detroit for $100,000. And I was wrong. I thought my calculations told me with $600,000 cash, I could generate, X amount out of this building and get this building fixed up. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, just to flash forward, the project cost $7 million. Okay. That's what it took to get that project online. But I thought it was going to take $600,000. I was treating it like a rental house, in the neighborhood. And so all of a sudden I realized I just bought this thing cash. And at the time, Midtown Detroit was not the absolute explosive hotspot that it is now. It's one of the hottest real estate markets in the country right now. But at the time, everybody was afraid of it, and that's the other thing I'll say about Detroit real quickly is that there are opportunities there because other people have it's basically what I call unfounded fear, and I'm not just talking about, it could be fear of anything in a market, but people looked at Detroit and thought that it was just dangerous. It was uncontrollable, that it was, whatever everybody thinks about it. But as I started visiting there, I started realizing it isn't that at all. This is like a serious city with 700,000 people. and they're amazing. The spirit of the people are amazing, and they want to succeed. And so, that was a big part of it. But I suddenly had this building on my hands and didn't know what to do with it. And so I was having lunch with a banker, and he said, have you thought about seeking subsidies? And I was like, what is that? And he was like, well, you have houses. Some of those are Section 8. And by then I had done that. He goes, the federal government doesn't provide housing for people, but they do provide incentives for private investors to create housing for people. And so I was like, yeah. So he introduced me to a consultant, and we went a whole different direction. We found out that you kind of have to score these projects. So we started looking at, well, what kind of money could we get from the federal government to do housing that was low income housing, right? And this was an area that by the time we got there, it had, ballooned in its rent rates so high that it really did drive, all of the poor people that had been living in that part of town just couldn't afford it anymore. And so this building, this was a place where they could afford it. That was the model that we chose. But it wasn't totally altruistic. It was like, I couldn't do it the way I thought I was going to do it. I needed to do something with this thing and not take a loss. And so, we ended up, working with a consultant, applying for, basically low-income housing tax credits. And that's its own, I can explain that deeper if you want, Stace, but essentially it enabled us to get the project done. It was about $4 million in construction, or what we call hard costs. It was about a little over $3 million in soft costs, everything from legal and development costs and architectural and stuff like that. But also part of the thing about going out and raising federal money like this is they require you as the developer to take a fee. Not like I had to be, convinced of that, but there was $1 million fee built into this deal, which was part of the $7 million that we got at the completion of construction. And then we own the project ongoing, and in some, really amazing loans that, my debt service on this $7 million project right now is $1,200 a year. And at the affordability period, when we get to 22 years on this, I'm 4 years into it now, 5 years into it. But when we get to that point, we can sell it on the open market, or we can redevelop it, refinance it, get another fee. So that was the first project that I did using low-income housing tax credits. It took a long time, but when we did close, we got reimbursed for all of our development costs, plus this $1 million fee, and we own the building. We control it outright, and over the life of the tax credits, in this case, those were 13 years. We would slowly, every year we comply and do what the federal government requires, basically around tenant selection. Then they cut you the next year's tax credits. And then you hire a company to go out and sell those tax credits at a small discount. And then that's how then we were paying back that lender. So
that's so interesting. I almost feel like I want to do like a master class or another interview or something, and really just like delve into that and everything you learned, and just,
yeah.
I
learned a lot, but I'll be honest.
Open for it.
Yeah, no, I learned a lot, but I'll be honest, one of the real big things that I learned is have somebody on your team who's already learned how to do that. Look, it's just not in my nature to, like, our closing package was three ring binders this tall. There was no way I was going to close that deal by myself. Yeah. I needed people who had been down that line before, and they got a hefty fee for it, but it was worth it in the end, because, we made a nice chunk of cash. We put ourselves on the map, and now we're spinning off into doing 2 more of those. One is going to be new construction. I had a parking lot across the street from this building, and I noticed after we got it done that there was almost no cars ever. So I ordered a quick feasibility study from my property management team and said, how many people living in this building have cars? And it turned out, we took a 43 unit building, we rehabbed it into a 26 unit building. And it turned out that 5 people had cars. So I just immediately went, well, that's not the highest and best use for that parking lot, is it? why don't we build another development over there, new construction, and do the same thing again? And the parking that we create will be enough for both of these. So, we have some challenges because there isn't enough parking. So we're going to have to go talk to our financing sources and all of that. But it just makes sense. It's the market has proven itself there. But that's an example of, I'm kind of proud of myself as a developer, right? It's so simple, but I was driving by, and instead of just like, yeah, that's my building. And I would do that. I would take friends and go, they would come to town, and I'd go, check that out. And they're like, wow, that's beautiful. Go, yeah, I did that. But then I started noticing that there was, low use of the parking lot. So my developer brain went, how can I change that? How can I make that more lucrative and more of service to the community, right? And more low income housing in this neighborhood. I mean, the mayor came and cut the ribbon on that first project with me, and they just can't get enough of it in the city. There's a real need for it. So now we're meeting the city's needs, which is why the mayor showed up. He didn't know me from Adam, but he knows me now. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's awesome. Yeah. I love it.
And then the other thing I kind of have started going after, Stacy, is there's a lot of vacant industrial buildings in Detroit. It's kind of one of my passions, and I love space from a very young age. I would go under the stairs in my house and build a little place where I could set up a typewriter with a little light. I still do that. I have 3 offices in Detroit. My truck, an office. I'm in my basement office. I still walk out. I got an acre and a half here behind me. I'm 2 miles from downtown, but I got this acre and a half. And I go out by this abandoned foundry, and I have a little desk built over 2 stumps. I swear, my wife is always.
I'm not even shocked at all. Not even shocked.
I remember I have an office in LA too, and sometimes I'm there, and my wife's like talking to me on FaceTime or whatever. She's like, "Where are you?" I'm like, "I'm at the office." She goes, "No, you're outside." I go, "Well, I walk down the alley. I'm sitting against somebody's garage here working." And literally, she's like, "Isn't there like a urine smell there where the homeless people are peeing?" And I was like, yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about it. I'm just nuts that way, but I love spaces. So I had a real call for industrial spaces here in the city. And so one of my most important acquisitions is a 45,000 square foot, 2-story poured concrete building with a 20-foot wide truck ramp that goes from the first to the second floor. So you can drive, we've driven bulldozers and stuff up to the second floor to demo out stuff. And then that has a fenced acre of land next to it. And so I call that Thank You Studios. It's kind of a love letter to Detroit. And it's a multi-use or a mixed use redevelopment of creative spaces that runs the gamut from a techno club in the basement of this building to a bodega that also has a kitchen and a bar. A large scale event space where people will walk up this flowing, 20-foot wide truck ramp to go to the second floor with 16-foot ceilings. And there's a huge space and an industrial kitchen, and then on up to the roof and the rooftop deck, which has a 360 view of the city, and then the land for parking and further development. So we're looking at townhouses being built there, and we're going to come up on some level. We can go 4 more stories on top of this structure with stick construction for multi-unit residential. I want to do a youth hostel in there. Like, there's maker spaces. It's a hospitality, food-driven maker space creative development called Thank You Studios.
And now, if anybody's looking at the description of what I put on this live, and I said the world's most interesting investor. Now do you see why? Now let me tell you guys, we got to wrap up here in a minute, but let me just tell you guys something funny, because you unfortunately will have missed the visual of it, so I can only have you imagine. So that company that I was doing training for 5 years, and then Robin came and was doing training, and when we would go on stage, and so there'd be like 500 real estate investors in the audience, and they're learning and stuff, and we're on stage and we're either teaching or answering questions. Robin became known in that organization. He would come, dressed like the rest of us, but he would come up to the stage and sit in the director's chair up there with no shoes on. in front of 500 real estate investors, and the rest of us would just be like, only Robin can get away with that. He just literally is just one of the most interesting people you'll ever meet. Just
I swear,
talented,
I walk into business meetings now, and I'll come into the room and there's the 4 principals, and they are looking past me to see who they're waiting to meet. They don't, and everybody just openly goes, laughs and said, you were not what we were expecting to see. You do not look like a real estate developer.
No, I mean, you just know, nobody ever sees it coming. And that's truly the beauty of it. I love it.
I'm kind of creeping while they're sleeping, but you better believe I am a real estate developer.
Yeah, no kidding.
No doubt about it. But I like that. I like that putting people back on their heels a little bit, Yeah, and I love wearing no shoes. I like staying grounded.
Yeah, well, Jennifer is the same. She's constantly walking around with no shoes on. She likes to be one with the earth. Like, she just wants to feel the earth under her feet. And I'm like, oh my God, absolutely. I must have shoes on. I cannot have my feet getting dirty. Can't handle it. So like, we're the total opposite. And one of our sons, he likes to have no shoes on too. And at one point we're like, nobody, you need to put shoes on because we're going outside. And he's like, but Robin doesn't wear shoes, so I shouldn't have to wear shoes. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Listen to him. He's carrying wisdom.
So good. Anyway, Robin, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have another opportunity. We can come up with something we can maybe delve a little bit deeper in and do some education. And anyway, I appreciate you, the role you've played just in my life over the years. And I'm so incredibly proud of you. And you're an amazing human being. You're an amazing developer, real amazing real estate investor. And I love you. And I'm so glad that you're here.
I love you too. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy to come back and talk more. If people have written questions, I'm happy to take some time and see if I can respond to any of those. I don't know if that's something you do, but
I don't normally, yes, but we have a hard 2 o'clock stuff. I can't do it today, but
I just mean in the future.
Yeah. So maybe one of the things that we can do, and we'll make an announcement ahead of time next time, guys, is if anyone has like specific questions about any of that stuff and we can kind of figure it out, we could do an actual Zoom call where we have people come in.
Yeah.
And then we can do like live, like you can do some talking and teaching, and they can do some live Q&A and stuff like that. Anyway, I hope everyone has an amazing Thursday. Once again, Robin, thank you. And I can't wait to do this again with you.
Amazing. I appreciate your time, Stacy. And bye, everybody. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Robin.